very glad and honored to have this opportunity at this anniversary of Philosophical Faculty of University of Novi Sad. I'm professor of philosophy at Department of Philosophy in Sarajevo University. But at the same time, I'm here as Vice Rector for International Relations, and on behalf of Rector of Sarajevo University and heads of university, I would like to congratulate this university, to the leadership, to the dean, and to the professor and students, academic community of Philosophical Faculty of Novi Sad. I was told that I will have something like 45 minutes for this presentation, for this paper. The topic is ressentiment, the question about man's life. Yeah, I should take care of translation. Yeah. So I will begin by reading a sentence from Friedrich Nietzsche, and it will serve for, as in French would say, un exergue. So bear in mind this sentence during my reading of the paper. The sentence reads, "Thus, in the modern world, the aim of meaning of culture is taken to be to breed a tame and civilized animal, a household pet, out of the beast of prey, man." So, my question today is about animals, isn't it? Or it's not. It's more about beasts, isn't it? Perhaps it's not either. What is certain is that our topic today is ressentiment in Nietzsche's philosophy. And still, I'm going to speak about animals and beasts in Nietzsche. However, it's true that I have promised I would speak about the topic, have my word about Nietzsche and the culture of ressentiment. I have promised that. Promise is an important concept in Nietzsche's genealogy of morals, in his late work where the concept of ressentiment was introduced for the first time in his thought. It is there that man was defined as an animal able to make promises. Am I myself an animal able to keep my promises? Speaking of animals and beasts, of course, I promise I will keep my promise to speak about ressentiment in the first place, and that to be considered in Nietzsche's thought, of course, and beyond. Am I going to speak on ressentiment and not to avoid animals and beasts? I believe it is the only way to grasp the true nature of ressentiment, as conceived by Nietzsche. The true nature, is there any true nature in Nietzsche's genealogy of morals? Particularly when it is about ressentiment. It is rather the most unnatural thing one can imagine. If it's true that the Western morality started with a generalized feeling of ressentiment, and that it is morality that alienates us from nature. Still, if there is something like a natural condition, or rather precondition, of human morality, of the unnatural world of culture and morality, then it is ressentiment according to Nietzsche. It can be remarked that it is the most natural feeling, but certainly not a healthy one, which is to say, it is against nature. It is notoriously evident that ressentiment plays a crucial role in the genealogy of morals, in each of the three treatises, but it's not at all clear how crucial this concept actually is. My point is that it is far more important to the whole project of genealogy than it has been usually thought in the reception history of the text. Surprisingly, ressentiment remains undefined in Nietzsche's text in spite of its importance. Undefined at least as a term. It is surprising that Nietzsche philologists who borrowed this foreign French word to play a key role in his genealogical vocabulary, didn't find worthwhile to clarify the reappropriation of the word, the specific capacity of its use and meaning. It is all the more surprising given the fact that the genealogical critique of Western culture undertaken here by Nietzsche relies heavily, if not decisively, on linguistic, primarily etymological analysis. These analyses are what actually provide the basis for the genealogical clarifications. A great number of words considered to be highly relevant in our understanding of morality were put under the scrutiny of the philologist. Nietzsche demonstrated how important etymological derivations from Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, Old German roots can be in revealing the major stages in the evolution of morality. The etymological account is perhaps more than a principal tool of Nietzsche's genealogy. One may wonder if it's what genealogy is all about. Heidegger, one of the most influential followers of the Nietzsche, may be called upon to testify to this. The question is, the word ressentiment, as it was used in the context of the genealogy of morals, did not deserve any particular attention of its author philologist. Let me notice in passing that the French word ressentiment is etymologically quite interesting, as its meaning has, over a period of time, gone through a remarkable metamorphosis. As Dictionary Robert, and of course more fully Littré, says, from the obsolete meaning of the word dating back to 17th and 18th century, which is souvenir, reconnaissant, and its souvenir reconnaissant, and its modern meaning synonym to rancœur, rancune, animosité, which is in English grateful or appreciative remembers, to the synonym words like rancor, grudge, bitterness, animosity. How foreign in the Nietzsche's time was that French word, and to whom? Was it so well appropriated, at least to a certain social class, that no clarification actually was needed? Still, what was so specific to this word that it was not, and perhaps could not be exchanged for some synonym word or words in the German language of the time, of course. However, a clarification of the important word, as it turned out, was required. The translators and interprets of the genealogy of morals have rarely neglected to tackle with the word. There are many examples of how each and almost every interpreter, translator of the genealogy of moral tackled with the word. I will not here enter in the details, but I would say, I will give 2 free quotes. I quote, although ressentiment is a French word and thus missing from the Grimm's dictionary, the German educated elite had used it since 17th century. The word was presumably adopted because German lacks a good word for the English resentment and the French ressentiment. There is a word groll, which, however, does not characterize a frame of mind or an attitude, but tends to arise with regard to a specific event or person. The Greuter dictionary notifies that these words serve reasonably well as the translations of each other, except that the French, I am emphasizing, word seems to possess a stronger connotation with memory. Rüdiger Büttner goes even so far to claim that ressentiment is a French expression, I quote, a more strengthened annoyance, less of a grudge than ressentiment in German does. So even German ressentiment, French word, has a different meaning of French original word, according to this interpretation, etc. Another intriguing issue was how to render in English the French word from German, how to make the double transfer. Here are 2 opposite opinions whether resentment is an appropriate English word for ressentiment. I quote, ressentiment, Nietzsche uses this French word, which since his writing and largely because of it, has entered the English language as an important term in psychology. A short definition is as follows: deep-seated resentment, frustration, and hostility accompanied by a sense of being powerless to express these feelings directly. It's from Merriam-Webster dictionary. Ressentiment is thus, says this author, significantly different in meaning from resentment. Another author is saying this, quote, before we get to the history of the concept of ressentiment, we should look at the word itself. Why, when we are discussing a German philosopher in English, do we use a French word? All ressentiment means in French resentment. That's a totally opposite approach. What for us here is important is Scheller's interpretation. When Scheller writes in 1912 a book exclusively devoted to ressentiment, he refers to the word as a technical term in Nietzsche's philosophy. Therefore, the meaning of the word has become connotated by the colors Nietzsche brought to it. Let us listen how Scheller defines its meaning. Quote, we do not use the word ressentiment because of special predilection for the French language, but because we did not succeed in translating it into German. Moreover, Nietzsche has made it a terminus technicus. Its natural meaning of the French word, it is in the natural meaning of the French word, I detect two elements. First of all, ressentiment is repeated experiencing and reliving of a particular emotional response reaction against someone else. The continual reliving of the emotion sinks it more deeply into the center of personality, but concomitantly removes it from the person's zone of action and expression. It's not a mere intellectual recollection of the emotion and of the events to which it responded. It is a re-experiencing of the emotion itself. And secondly, says Scheller, the word implies that the quality of this emotion is negative, that it connotates a movement of hostility. Perhaps the German word Groll, rancor, comes closest to the essential meaning of the term. Rancor is just such a suppressed wrath, independent of ego's activity, which moves obscurely through the mind. It finally takes shape through the repeated reliving of intentionalities of hatred or other hostile emotions. In itself, it does not contain a specific hostility intention, but it nourishes any number of such intentions. End of quote. Therefore, if it has all these layers of meaning in itself, Scheller claims it has, the word can't be translated. He tried, but he couldn't do it. The untranslatable word for at least two prominent German philosophers, Nietzsche and Scheller. What one, the philologist, omitted, the other, his successor, has given, the linguistic explanation. The crucial term of the genealogy requires to be explained not only as a concept, but firstly as a word. French, foreign, important, reappropriated, even remade word. What does make this word so special? Scheller explained. But someone may still object that this is not a linguistic analysis, but a thick conceptual interpretation. It is more than evident that here involved are high stakes of Scheller's philosophy. It is hard not to hear typical overtones of the phenomenological discourse at work. Scheller can respond to this, that his conceptual analysis tries to grasp meaning inherent in the word itself. He says, I repeat, quote, in the natural meaning of the French word, I detect two elements, end of the quote. It is this natural meaning that holds the analysis by the word. Natural meaning, I emphasize the word natural. It reveals a very important stake here. Hence, the word ressentiment should be preserved in its natural French meaning. It can't be translated into the German except at the cost of being denaturalized. A plant not to be transplanted. Is Scheller a philosopher who preserves the plant in its natural condition or shape and at the same time denaturalized it? Whereas Nietzsche left it as it is, maybe from the fear not to devitalize it. Anyhow, I suspect that the proposed conceptual analysis of the natural meaning of the word would be opposed by Nietzsche. Although I believe that Nietzsche was more interested in preserving natural semantic charge of the word than Scheller actually was. Not simply because Nietzsche remains silent of the issue. To support this claim, I am going to supply two corresponding arguments. First, the way the whole project of genealogy is conceived suggests that to preserve the naturalistic semantic charge of the French word is for Nietzsche of a crucial importance. Second, there is a considerable overlapping between Nietzsche's and Scheller's understanding, this time not of the word, but of the notion of ressentiment, of the phenomenon if it's related to a personal, I emphasize, personal attitude. This is to say that drawing out of a conceptual implications from the natural world, as Scheller did, won't be considered as a misinterpretation, provided that it is supposed natural content is not destroyed. I wonder if strictly linguistic components of Scheller's clarification of the word, in both of the elements he found there, may be helpful in paving the path for better understanding of Nietzsche's genealogy. Let us take a tour through the already cited passage, keeping our eye on certain words and particularly on certain prefixes. The word ressentiment is compound word with a not hyphenated prefix, re. Scheller has done a great job to elucidate the importance and the function of this tiny morpheme having only two phonemes. Important is to see how he translated the prefix, the stem of the word, and their mutual combination, all that in a variety of forms through repeated attempts. Now I will just underline the words in the passage already quoted, translated in English, matching the words in English translation with corresponding words in the original German text. Ressentiment, says Nietzsche, is the repeated experiencing and reliving, das wiederholte durch und nachleben. It is re-experiencing of the emotion itself. Immer wieder durch und nachleben der Emotion. A renewal of the original feeling. Es ist ein Wiederleben der Emotion selbst. Nachfühlen, wiederfühlen. It finally takes shape through the repeated reliving, durch wiederholtes Durchleben. What we have got is the following: living, experiencing, emotion, feeling, which should be a package of synonyms, each time being preceded by a staccato of the two phonemes, R and E. In the German, it's Leben, Emotion, en fühlen, prefixed by wieder, nach, immer wieder, durch. The interesting thing is that these German prepositions and adverbs are all compressed into a single unit, RE, so that English language gives back to the French language its loan word from Latin. Thus, the prefix meaning again or again and again to indicate repetition was used repeatedly, actually, again and again, in Scheller's definition of the word. Not less worth noting is the second meaning of the morpheme RE, which is back or backward to indicate withdrawal or backward motion. So in ressentiment, there is this re after re after re, etc., as it happens in Freud's Wiederholungszwang. This repetitive operation at work here appears most condensed in the symptom from the last quoted line. Repeated reliving. The repeated reliving of what? Of negative, hostile emotions condemned to be repeated because they must remain suppressed. Is Scheller describing in his own phenomenological vocabulary Freud's mechanism of Verdrängung when writing that, I quote, the continual reliving of the emotion sinks it more deeply into the center of personality, but concomitantly removes it from the person's zone of action and expression. End of quote. What is actually this continuous and repeated reliving of a hostile emotion? It's deeper and deeper sinking into the zone where no true action or expression is possible. It is not any sort of emotion, but an essentially reactive one. Scheller emphasized that what is suppressed is, I quote, a particular emotional reaction, again, we hear in it, re. Eine bestimmte emotionale Antwortreaktion gegen einen anderen. It is actually a reaction that cannot be abreacted, nor it can disappear. It is constantly relieved, which is to say, revitalized and reanimated, but never fully brought to life, revived. Scheller depicts an amazing allegory, in fact. Cut off from the ego's activity, which is to say, from the activity to cour, because the phenomenologist, for the phenomenologist, as Scheller is, there lies the very source of life. The suspended reaction of ressentiment, the emotional reaction constantly renewed and postponed, he says, moves obscurely through the soul. Dunkel durch die Seele wandelt es. For the late Derrida, who was obsessed with ghosts, this might be a challenge, neither alive or dead, lifelessly living entity wandering in the soul of Western man. It is this double re of living, the repeated reliving, das wiederholte durch und nachleben, that gives us a clue to the principal objective of Nietzsche's genealogy. It traces a path to the very origin of human morality. Let me now turn to the mentioned conceptual overlapping between the two thinkers. There is at least a partial agreement between Nietzsche and Scheller concerning the concept of ressentiment. The concept this time, not word. In his genealogy, at different points, Nietzsche gives quite precise definitions. This passage is usually quoted. The man of ressentiment is neither upright, nor naive, nor honest and direct with himself. His soul squints, his spirit loves hiding places, secret paths, and back doors. Everything furtive attracts him as his world, his security, his refreshment. He understands about remaining silent, not forgetting, waiting, temporarily diminishing himself, humiliating himself. End of quote. Is this a relevant definition of ressentiment? Relevant for what? What is actually defined here is the man of ressentiment, how he behaves, what he thinks, feels, and loves, what kind of character he is. This definition obviously belongs to the Nietzsche psychology of ressentiment, but it is the sole and exclusive domain of his dealing with the phenomenon. Is it? The majority of interpreters does not go beyond the psychology of ressentiment. It is therefore not surprising that the next sentence after the last quoted is usually omitted. It reads, "A race of such men of ressentiment will necessarily end up cleverer than any noble race." End of quote. Nietzsche is also interested in the psychology of races, but majority of interpreters is not. Many believe that it is not worth of mentioning, holding that the author paid tribute to the prejudice of his time. A lot of efforts have been made to exonerate Nietzsche from his Rassentheorie. But what if it's a particularly important element of his theory of ressentiment and therefore the fundament of the genealogies? The very term ressentiment appears for the first time in the first essay of genealogy, chapter 10. There we find the following lines. I quote, "The slave revolt in morality begins when the ressentiment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. The ressentiment of these beings who are prevented from a genuine reaction, that is, something active, and who compensate for that with a merely imaginary vengeance. While all noble morality grows out of the triumphant affirmation of oneself, slave morality from the start says no to what is outside, other, to a not itself. And this no is its creative act. This transformation of the glance from which conferred value, this necessary projection toward what is out inside of back into itself, this is inherent in ressentiment. In order to arise, slave morality always requires first an opposing world, a world outside itself. Psychologically speaking, it needs external stimuli in order to act at all. Its action is basically reaction. The reverse is the case with the noble method of valuation. It acts and grows spontaneously. It seeks its opposite only to affirm its own self, even more thankfully, with even more rejoicing." End of quote. Here is the concept of ressentiment illuminated from the perspective of the slave morality and the noble or master morality. These are considered to be symmetrically opposed classes or rather castes. Attitudes. Now we have the picture of the two mutually antagonistic groups whose morality has been defined in the terms of a specific personal attitude typical to each group. This class morality differentiation is thus achieved through a psychological analysis. However, its scope is not individualistic at all. It aims at reaching far beyond this scope, and this is the basic structure of collective selves. It is implied that there are only two types of collective selves in general, the slave and the master. The psychology of ressentiment is not a psychology in a usual sense of term, obviously. It should capture basic traits of human mind, the very ontology of mankind. To that testifies Nietzsche's use of broad metaphysical categories, actually the most basic conceptual oppositions like outside, inside, self, the other, genuine reality, imaginary reality, action, reaction, and the like. It is not wrong to say that in order to give a comparative account of the two types of moral evaluation, Nietzsche draws on psychology of ressentiment. But it is certainly not enough. The monumental task of metaphysics is here at stake. As the question of being is posed in evolutionary terms, Nietzsche's genealogy is inspired by Darwin and evolutionists, what has to be solved is the enigma of the birth of human mind, culture, and moral values. Matthias Riese has recently rightly noted, quote, Nietzsche's account constitutes the same sort of speculation about socialization and its impact on individuals that Rousseau develops in his discourse on the origin of inequality, Kant in his conjectures on the beginning of human history, and Freud in civilization and its discontents, despite all the differences. Of course, I will add totem and taboo. What we see from the first introductory definition of ressentiment by Nietzsche, it is the matter of psychology. It concerns, quote, beings who are prevented from a genuine reaction that is something active and who compensate for that with a merely imaginary vengeance, end of quote. And then a huge machinery of metaphysics ought to be introduced. Already there, in the first definition of ressentiment in chapter 10, it turns out that the personal attitude towards the inner and outer world has broad ontological implication. If it's to understand that the very sense of genealogical project, the question of personal attitude should be central. We should ask how personal it is, this attitude that explains ressentiment. Indeed, Nietzsche and Scheller agree in characterizing the general attitude of the person of ressentiment. Scheller has devoted the whole book on that topic. Indeed, who can better do the job of describing all sorts of personal attitude, recall Husserl's famous term of Einstellung, than a phenomenologist. In Scheller, the morally harmful behavior of a person of ressentiment fully belongs to the horizon of morality. For Nietzsche, ressentiment is neither fully personal, not it exclusively belongs to the horizon of human morality. It's neither fully included nor excluded from the morality. It is not quite inside, nor it is quite outside. It is swinging back and forth. It seems to belong to what Derrida labeled the undecidable, which makes it a useful tool for the constructive strategies. It has no proper place under the arch of metaphysics, although it can be rightly reduced to a moral attitude when our ambition is to study moral phenomena, not from a radical genealogical perspective. What appears here is a crucial distinction, and that is that between Scheller's immanent moralism and Nietzsche's transcendental immoralism. The point of difference in Nietzsche's transgression of the personal attitude's perspective, this is the point of difference between the two. To see where their paths diverge, given their common concern with the ressentiment, is highly instructive. I believe to read in Scheller Abhandlungen und Aufsätze, first volume, published in Leipzig, 1915, the last essay entitled Zur Idee des Menschen. Chapter 2 on Homo Naturalis. I have only one page more. There the author explained why he is not at all interested in evolutionary arguments concerning descent of man, while at the same time apparently accepting the animal nature of human beings. His central argument there is that our human personhood is not a product of evolution, but a God's creation. Man is a new type of beings and things, a realm of persons who have no originated at all, very much like colors, numbers, space, time, and other true essences, they have not originated either. However, the God's creation, whom Scheller calls Gottsucher, God seeker, is also an animal belonging to the natural world. Like the essence of personhood, it is not a product of the evolution. I quote, similarly, Homo naturalis is not something developed from the animal world, as he simply was, is, and will remain an animal, end of quote. On the other side, Nietzsche is highly interested in the being of Homo naturalis as well as in the origins of man's personality. Similar to Scheller, he thinks that man's personality is of moral nature in the first place. However, the supposed origins are in the nature where there are beasts, wild beasts of prey. So if we start our interpretation of ressentiment from the class antagonism between masters and slaves, provided that the genealogical explanation still is our aim, we are already many millennia late. What has been considered in the reception history as a pretty unimportant additions derived from Nietzsche's metaphysical naturalism that used to be ignored deserves to be finally taken seriously. One has to take a look behind the historical scene, towards the other scene, as would Jacques Lacan said, hidden in the abyss of time, there where Nietzsche discerned the cruel world of human animals. Then, prehistoric supplements of each and every major historical actor of category supplied by Nietzsche in Genealogy of Morals, they gain an importance. Behind the nobles and the common people, there are joyful monsters and sick, powerless human animals. Behind the two classes of masters and slaves, one found two races, the blonde beasts, Aryans, and the dusky, dark-haired non-Aryans, etc. The so-called logic of supplementarity is probably required to compensate for the repression, Verdrängung, for the repeated reliving of proto-historical life word. To think the animality of human animal is the task of genealogical thinking. If it turns out to be a business of metaphysics, it is because the difference between healthy and sick beasts is the most fundamental difference that opens up the genealogical interrogation. This animal difference, the difference in life power, which is, for Nietzsche, life is power, power is life, simply, underpins all basic metaphysical differences. It is precisely there that ressentiment should be thought of. Psychology, or even the speculative anthropology ascribed to Nietzsche, is not enough. The guiding thread might be his animal psychology, if we take it not to be a mere psychology. In the Genealogy of Morals, it is ressentiment that illuminates the path toward the origin of manhood, personhood of persons. Man was born from the spirit of ressentiment. The nature does not know inner words, minds, thoughts, but there are instincts and feelings, ressentiment. It is there that the genealogy should start from. Ressentiment marks the crucial point in the evolution of species when instincts and feelings, ressentiment, enter into the twisting course, trace a bending curve that we recognize in the in R-E of ressentiment. It is a process occurring in the streams of life. It is that same process Derrida found in the genealogical explanation of arts in Kant. Derrida, in his essay on economimesis, described this as a flexion of physis, relation to itself of the nature. And concluding sentence. It is this detour from animal detour from animal, still challenge for the contemporary ethics, particularly after the 20th century racism. To quote Giorgio Agamben, the ethics of the 20th century opens with Nietzsche's overcoming of ressentiment. Thank you.